Hey, welcome to what we're calling the Old Guys blog. We're really open to a better name. We're trying to
Please.
play with that. You can contact though right now at Old Guys blog at aspengrovenetwork.com with name suggestions, topics you'd like to hear comments on. We're really a bunch of friends that have combined 200 years in ministry, and we're going to talk today about the topic of transparency and ministry. And we're going to go first to all the way to Stockholm, Sweden, to hear from John Van Dinter. Tell us a little bit about yourself, John, and then talk to us a little bit about transparency.
Yes, well, John van Inter, former Dutchman who has become a Swede. My wife and I and family, we worked in Holland. We were thrown into leadership there after becoming a Christian in the Jesus People movement when I was about 17. And since then, we have been in ministry in different ways, most of the time. I worked in the Philippines, Japan, and in many other nations actually, but only short term then. Lived also in the States, church planter of multicultural or intercultural churches, as you would call it, in depending on where you are. Very difficult subject for me because things happened in my life that made me go through deep, deep valleys, or even deep down in the pit, you could say, and been also in mountaintop experiences. But if we talk about this subject, I feel like also at the beginning of this series where all of us are talking about our experiences of our 50 plus years of ministry, I said to the other guys, I want to already rather in the beginning, I would like to just share my story on integrity, because if I don't do that in the beginning, I don't feel like I'm really honest, even though I want to be honest. Because the fact is that for like 5.5 years ago, I confessed to my wife, to one of our pastors, and to Paul, the fact that I had started a relationship with another woman who is not my wife. And I resigned right away, also, of course, in the church. And that was it. I was leading a network of churches at that time, all churches that were planted by us. And that experience, I never anticipated that I would go through. It was one of the most, it is me, no, not one of the most, it's the most difficult um, experience that I've had in my life. Most difficult to also deal with. Um, I asked at the same time as I had shared this, and I wrote a letter to the different churches, the different sites, so they would all hear, all the members would hear the same story at the same time. Well, they had their one Sunday services. And that brought a tremendous shock, first to my wife and to my family. We have 4 children, but also to the churches, the different sites, because a total of 4 of them I was part of starting up with also. So it was tremendously tough for me personally, but especially also for the others, even more so. And it took a long time to actually deal with that. But I wanted to tell that to begin with, so that you feel that some of the things that we all value very much is transparency, and to talk about the ups and downs of our lives and ministries. And so if I would not have told this, then I wouldn't have felt good. I would have felt a liar, even though I would never say, how can I say, would say that I would say that I haven't done it. This is one of the things that I feel people need to know. Um, I also asked the other leaders in the church to write a press release that would go to the Christian papers, so that there would be no speculation on what had happened, where I could take my responsibility and deal with that. That's the short story.
Uh,
Um,
Guys, comments for John or questions?
You've been working your way back for 5 years though, too. You haven't given up on the church. What are you doing now?
well, I could say like I I told people also that I would never expect to be reinstated as a pastor within the context of the church. That I didn't expect that I didn't believe that was part. I just wanted to be a member, a brother. So the church, of course, had to really be healed of that, and that meant that I had to refrain from being in the church where I had been, that I had considered my home, and where I was the lead pastor. Um, so, but I can say, the first year it was a daily tears. I mean, honestly, day after day, guilt, tears of shame, hurt, self pity, uh, all of that, all the time for the first year. And it was very special in one way, because now we sit here with the three of you. I sit with you, and it was like Bill has been supporting that. But I think what happened very strongly was also Paul, without me knowing that really and understanding it, he made a commitment to FaceTime me every single day in that first year. Every day he called me, and I think that and the love of my wife, who actually forgave me the day after I had confessed, which was, I mean, still cannot understand that she was able to do that. Although she told me to, she would, appreciate if I could be somewhere else for 2 weeks at least, which I did. And then she said, "Now I'm ready to have you back." She had to process everything, of course. But that really helped me through that. Um, uh, but that was like a very hard time. I got counseling. I met with some of the leaders of the church, but um, it really took a year to be able to first deal with that. And I was. It took about a year also. After that, I was welcomed as a member in one of our sites. And in the meanwhile, my wife and I, we joined church with Woodridge. As Paul was leading the church at that time, we were weekly going through that. And so what has happened then? I mean, my passion, like, this is strange because um, people don't always understand it, but I was trying to tell people that, although I did this, I kept on loving Jesus. And
Yeah.
this is the strange thing, because if you love him, then you should obey him. I loved him, but I didn't obey him. But I couldn't get him out of my life. I was thinking of him daily. I was talking to him daily. But even in this time that I had the relationship, I was crying, most of my nights. I was crying myself to sleep, even before I had confessed. It was like a real battle going on. So it took me a long time to actually recuperate. And it went very, very slowly. Um, I was joining the church as a volunteer, like as everyone else, but I kept away because I was so ashamed, and I thought like everyone would look at me with those eyes, and of course people who knew me, they had read it in the papers, and so it was like um, every new contact. Many people Google each other, as you might know, and that was the first thing they would find, even new contacts with people. So it was like quite hard, but I started working. I started working with a taxi, and I got involved in organizing taxi drivers that were driving with Uber and Bolt taxi apps. As I saw their situation, and as I saw how they were abused by these companies, and how I saw that as slavery, really. I felt like I
Mhm.
wanted to get involved with them. And that's what I'm still doing. But I'm also, got a little involved as the war in the Ukraine started. I brought many, many refugees here, and that's really where I suddenly sort of realized that God brought me back. When the war started, I was the week after the war started, I was picking up refugees from the border, from Poland, and I was organizing bus trips to bring them to Sweden. And as I was meeting them in the bus, suddenly, without me thinking of it, I started preaching.
Yeah.
I started preaching about God, and um, not long sermons, but just like as I welcomed them, and as I explained why we were there and what they could expect coming to Sweden, I started preaching, and I didn't even think about it. It just happened, and that's where I felt that God sort of brought me back, daring to think that He could still use me,
Yeah.
even my experience as a pastor, and slowly. That's the first time I recognized that I felt boldly enough to talk about him publicly for a group of 50, 60 people in a bus.
Steve, what thoughts or questions do you have?
Well, I really think that most every man that I've ever met with have told me that um, their sexuality is one of the most difficult things to control in marriage or outside of marriage, before marriage. Um, I think that it's um, not surprising that the devil would try to take someone who had tried to be faithful for a long time and provide the temptation. Um, what we aren't good at as a church, the capital C church, is restoration. Um, and that has to be part of the story. Um, and there's not one man or woman who should feel as if they have, in their own abilities, the right to stand up and preach. All of us are broken vessels that are just welcoming healing and hope. And John, I'm sorry that you had that hard time in your marriage and the choices that you made, but in God's eyes, you're completely forgiven. You were forgiven even before you made that choice. If He's forgiven you, I certainly forgive you, and all of us should forgive you. I'm glad that you went through that year with a daily talk with Paul to try to guide you out of the mire that you found yourself in. But I've known pastors who found themselves in the same situation, and rather than running off and doing something else, they went through and stayed in place and went through restoration. And it was a long process reviewed by many people. And as a couple, they are closer than they ever were.
Well, there's something I can say too about our family, that this actually, believe it or not, brought us all much closer together. As I became also like in the eyes of others, of our children and their partners, uh, as a normal human being, as they told me, like, but
Yeah.
also they were angry with me, they were disappointed and everything else. But the result, if I look back now in these years, that because of their willingness to forgive, um, actually we have grown as a family in our relationships tremendously.
One of my favorite things, John, you said was that your wife told you after just a short period of time, she said, I feel like I have my husband back now.
Yes, he told me that.
Yeah.
That took some time, but she wanted me back right away the day after my confession, and that was very humbling because he said, like, you have always been my soul friend. We have always been like this together. She was 15, I was 16 and a half when we got together. We've been married many years. Um, But that
So,
really meant the world to me.
yeah. So Paul, I mean, to help people in restoration, what was it that motivated you to make those calls? And and what were you thinking about that?
The when John called, I try to pray behind my listening, and the Holy Spirit said, "Tell him you forgive him." So the first thing I said to John was, "I forgive you,"
Yeah.
and then I felt like the Spirit said, "Invite him to come and speak at Woodridge," and I invited him to come and speak at Woodridge, which we're hoping will happen now. Um,
Yeah.
and and then I had the sense from the Spirit, um, call him every day, And the the amazing thing with that is for a year, every day we found a time to. It never was a burden. It
Hmm.
it always worked out, and I just wanted to. I wanted to make sure that he knew he was loved by God, that he was forgiven, and that he could take steps to be restored. Like Steve was saying, in Galatians 6, it says, if someone's caught in a sin, you who are spiritual, or you are who walking with the Spirit, should restore them, but watch yourself lest you
Yeah.
also fall. And the Greek word for restore there is also used for mending, when Peter was mending nets uh, on the shoreline. And it
Hmm.
was what Luke would have used when he set a broken bone. And basically, you realign the bone, you restrict it, and then you give time for healing. But when you break a bone, if you break an arm bone and you do those things, it actually grows back stronger. So I knew that John could become stronger if he was restored, but I
Hmm.
knew that shame would want to push this
Yeah.
in ways that would be very, very harmful. And I
Yeah.
personally think John is a stronger person, a stronger Christ follower. Um,
Mhm.
even a week or two, 6 weeks after that, and has continued to grow. And I just wish we, as Steve said, with the capital C Church, would get an attitude that we're meant to be hospitals where you restore. And if you can't acknowledge if you can't acknowledge something, then it can't be restored.
It would
So
just be hidden and it would fester. And but when we had a planning meeting with the four of us, the very first thing that John said is, I want
Want to tell the
to
truth?
say
Yeah.
this on the very first episode. This is, I believe, the fourth episode, and it was only because we didn't want to start the whole series that way.
Yeah.
There's been no desire to not make things very public. And for those who are watching, I would just say, be really careful because this is a man who fought in the trenches for the Lord for a long time, and God used him powerfully,
Hmm.
and yet he still was tempted. All of us are tempted. Don't
Yeah.
begin to think that you aren't. Uh, in recent years, we've seen some of the celebrity pastors across America end up having to step down because of a variety of different things that they did that weren't appropriate. None of us are better than that. All of us are just sinners, and we're saved by grace, and that's undeserved favor. So
Hmm.
if you were thinking that John doesn't deserve it, you're right, and we don't either. And but God restores us closer and closer to His image, so that we can bring other people who don't have hope back into a relationship with Him. And God has used
Yeah.
you, John, in such a powerful way.
A lot of what we talk about here is to try to help younger pastors, and one of the things I would say is there is temptation in the ministry. I can remember one of my first churches, the one of my elders, his wife called me up and said, "Is there any way I could get together with you? Just me and you so I could show you how much you mean to me and how much I appreciate you, you know. And what I'm saying is when you're a younger pastor, you're going to find that there is temptation out there. And some of it is going to come right within the walls. But as John was talking, you know, we all know that, remember in Paul, that in Corinthians, where this one man was having an affair with his father's wife, it says. But then in Second Corinthians chapter 2, verse 5, Paul writes and says, I'm not overstating it, because he had originally said, put this man out of your fellowship. But then in 2 Corinthians, he says, the man who caused all the trouble hurt all of you more than he hurt me. Most of you opposed him, and that was punishment enough. Now, however, it is time to forgive and comfort him. Otherwise, he may be overcome by discouragement. So I urge you now to reaffirm your love for him. I wrote to you as I did to test you and see if you would fully comply with my instructions. When you forgive this man, I forgive him too. And when I forgive whatever needs to be forgiven, I do so with Christ's authority for your benefit, so that the Satan will not outsmart us, for we are familiar with his evil schemes. So Paul says if we let these people continue to live ostracized from the Christian community, this is the devil's strategy. And he says, I say with the authority of Jesus Christ, forgive this man and accept this man back. And I think that's such good teaching for us to remember, because again, we know we're all sinners saved by God's grace.
Hey, we're going to wrap this session, but if you're listening, the next session we're going to ask John just some questions of how did he know, what did he know, and then we're going to talk more about the whole matter of transparency as it applies to the rest of us. If you are, as Steve said, if you are in a current situation and you want specific advice, do email. Just say I could use some advice. oldguysblog@aspengrovenetwork.com, and we'll at least help you find a way. I want you to know that you thinking somehow you're going to get your way out of it is not a good strategy.
Not by yourself.
Right? They're better
Get some
strategies.
help.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing you. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.